Look, I have a love-hate relationship with games like Path of Exile, Last Epoch, Grim Dawn, Diablo IV, and Titan Quest. Pretty much action role-playing games. And I was going to do a video about these games, but I realized that I don't know anything about this genre outside of those games. I just know Diablo was like the grandfather, even though it has morphed into something very mainstream. Well, I took a look back and learned that one of the most popular genres in gaming currently originated by two brothers, Max and Eric Schaffer, and a talented programmer, David Brevik. So, it all started back in the early 90s with Max and Eric working at a software company called FM Waves. At the time, they were simply trying to avoid getting stuck with making console ports that offered little creative control and terrible pay. There, they met David Brevik, who they ended up collaborating with to make projects at FM Waves for games like Gordo 106, an obscure platformer featuring a laboratory monkey. And after recognizing their shared ambitions, the trio decided to break off and start their own independent studio, Condor Games. Max, Eric, and David founded Condor Games in 1993. The studio's start was defined by intense financial stress. According to the Schaffer brothers, they were always completely out of money. To keep the lights on, they took on contract work, most notably developing the Sega Genesis fighting game Justice League Task Force. During the summer of 1994, David Brevik became obsessed with Angband, a punishing, text-based roguelike. This sparked an idea at Condor. What if they made a turn-based roguelike, but with modern graphics and sound? Max, Eric, and David drafted a design document for a game called Diablo. They brought the pitch to the annual Summer Consumer Electronics Show in Chicago. Because they couldn't afford a dedicated booth for their pitch, they hustled around the convention center in between their scheduled demo shifts for Justice League Task Force. But every single publisher they pitched the idea gave them the same exact response: RPGs are dead. And they weren't wrong. At the time, the genre was experiencing a severe creative and commercial drought. The late 1980s and early 1990s had been a golden age for computer RPGs, defined by franchises like Wizardry, Ultima, and Dungeons & Dragons games. But by 1993, the well had run dry. Casual players abandoned the spreadsheet-heavy CRPGs in favor of action games, like Doom that delivered hyper-fast 3D action, and Myst that showed off the immense storage power of the CD-ROM, offering players photorealistic worlds and high-quality audio. Traditional slow-paced RPG games were suddenly viewed by executives as archaic relics that couldn't sell top-tier hardware. Unbeknownst to Condor, another studio based in Southern California had been hired to develop the Super Nintendo version of the Justice League Task Force game. That studio was Silicon and Synapse, a company that soon renamed itself Blizzard Entertainment. The two teams ended up establishing a crucial relationship. Following the massive financial success of Warcraft: Orcs and Humans in 1994, Silicon and Synapse, now Blizzard Entertainment, was flush with cash. They reconnected with Condor and offered to fund and publish Diablo. As development progressed, Condor's financial instability threatened the project. About 6 months before Diablo launched, Blizzard Entertainment's parent company offered to buy Condor outright, and the deal was finalized in early 1996, 6 months before Diablo released. Condor was renamed Blizzard North. This allowed the studio to maintain competitive creative autonomy in San Mateo while benefiting from the financial stability and brand recognition of Blizzard South. But it came at a price. When Blizzard agreed to publish Diablo, They gave Condor two strict mandates. The game had to support multiplayer and it had to abandon turn-based combat for real-time action. Brevik fiercely resisted the change. He was a traditionalist who loved the tactical, methodical pacing of turn-based RPGs, where the game essentially waited for the player's input before enemies could move. Blizzard argued that real-time action was more engaging and would appeal to a broader audience. The debate culminated in a studio-wide vote at Condor. Brevik voted no to protect his turn-based vision, but the rest of the team voted yes. Defeated by the democratic process, Brevik called Blizzard south and agreed to make the change, but negotiated for extra development time and a milestone payment, assuming it would require a massive overhaul of the game's core engine. But in reality, the foundational shift that birthed the action RPG genre only took a few hours. Sitting down on a Friday afternoon, Brevik examined his turn-based code. The game operated on a system where every player action consumed a turn, which then triggered the enemies to take their actions. Instead of rewriting the entire engine, Brevik essentially shrunk the time interval of a turn into a fraction of a second. He mapped the command to step forward and attack directly to the mouse click, letting the turn cycle continuously 24 times a second. Within hours, he had a prototype running. Brevik clicked his mouse on a skeleton, and instead of waiting for a turn to resolve, the character instantly walked across the room and smashed the skeleton to pieces. The satisfaction of that single mouse click transformed a niche, methodical dungeon crawler into a frenetic action game, cementing the core gameplay loop of the action RPG genre. After this, the original Diablo was a massive success that stripped the friction out of the traditional dungeon crawler, replacing slow, turn-based mechanics with real-time, click-to-move action. But it was the sequel that built that modern action RPG genre's popularity. When Diablo II arrived in the summer of 2000, it didn't just iterate on its predecessor. It created a mechanical blueprint so brilliant that the entire gaming industry is still copying it till this day. After the claustrophobic single dungeon descent of the first Diablo, the team wanted to blow the doors open. They expanded the world from one town to 4 distinct acts, featuring randomly generated wilderness and dungeons. They also increased the roster from 3 basic archetypes to 5 highly scaled classics. The team endured a grueling 12-month crunch to push the game to its June 2000 release, operating on a democratic design philosophy. They made characters playable immediately, argued over every mechanic daily, and iterated until the gameplay loop was undeniably fun. Before Diablo II, character progression in RPGs was largely about bumping up base stats, like strength or dexterity, or unlocking a linear list of spells as you level up. Diablo II, on the other hand, introduced the skill tree. By organizing abilities into branching paths, players couldn't just have everything. You had to make hard choices. Putting points into a skill didn't just increase its damage, it unlocked subsequent, more powerful abilities further down the branch. This system allowed for diverse builds within the same class. This mechanic was so foundational that it escaped the RPG genre entirely, directly influencing the talent systems in MMOs like World of Warcraft, and becoming a staple in everything from Borderlands to Cyberpunk 2077. Diablo II didn't invent loot, but it weaponized the psychology of the loot chase. Instead of handcrafting every weapon, Blizzard North built a component system that randomly combined prefixes and suffixes to generate thousands of variable items. More importantly, they perfected color-coded rarity, like, white equals normal, blue equals magic, and so on. which is a visual language for loot that is now the universal standard across gaming. While Diablo proved that real-time, click-to-movement combat was fun, Diablo II proved that combining deep build customization, an endless loot system, and a competitive online economy could keep players hooked for decades. By 2003, Blizzard Entertainment, and by extension Blizzard North, was owned by a massive French conglomerate called Vivendi. Vivendi was experiencing severe financial turmoil and publicly announced plans to sell off its gaming division to cover massive corporate debts. This terrified the Blizzard North team. The studio had grown significantly, and the founders felt the company was becoming a massive empire in which they were forced to answer to anonymous shareholders rather than focus on creative design. As Vivendi began shopping Blizzard around to shore up accounts, the original creators realized they were about to be sold to the highest bidder, and they had absolutely no say in the matter. In June 2003, things reached a boiling point. The core leadership of Blizzard North and Blizzard Vice President Bill Roper demanded a seat at the negotiating table. They wanted communication about the impending sale and financial protections for their employees in case the new buyers gutted the studio. To force Vivendi's hand, the four leaders drafted an email, essentially issuing an ultimatum. Give us a say in the future of our studio, or we resign. They expected negotiations. Instead, Vivendi called their bluff and accepted their resignations, effective immediately. And, well, they left. The sudden departure of the four Blizzard founders sent shockwaves throughout the company, which led to the end of Blizzard North that was officially shut down in August 2005. After the founders of Blizzard left, they decided to start a new studio called Flagship Studios, led by Bill Roper, Max and Eric Schiffer, and David Brevik. The core team consisted of former Blizzard North executives and developers responsible for creating the massively successful Diablo franchise. If you're enjoying this video, please be sure to hit the subscribe button because it helps grow the channel. Leaving Blizzard to form an independent studio, they set out to build their own intellectual property with total creative control. And that started with Hellgate London, which began shortly after the studio's inception. The game was highly ambitious, blending the randomized loot and dungeon crawling of Diablo with a 3D first-person, third-person perspective. However, the development process suffered from severe scope creep. Flagship attempted too many firsts simultaneously. It was their first 3D game, their first shooter, their first subscription-based model, and their first attempt at software as a service, or what we now call live service. On top of this, they insisted on launching the game globally in 17 different languages across multiple international publishers simultaneously, stretching their resources incredibly thin. Gamers' expectations for Hellgate London were astronomical because of the founders' pedigree. The gaming press and public effectively viewed it as Diablo in 3D, and Flagship leaned heavily into this hype. Months before the game even launched, the studio secured over 60 magazine covers worldwide and poured millions into marketing, which include licensing deals for comic books, novels, manga, and action figures. Internally, Flagship operated under the assumption that the game was a guaranteed mega hit. And if you never heard of Hellgate London, that shows how much of a mega hit it became. Because when it launched on October 31st, 2007, the wheels immediately fell off. The launch was plagued by severe issues, with game-breaking bugs, and a subscription that offered very little meaningful content to justify a monthly fee, along with many other things. But more importantly, without the expected subscription revenue to sustain the massive studio, Flagship ran out of money in less than a year after the launch. In August 2008, Flagship Studios laid off its staff and closed its doors. The Western servers of Hellgate London were shut down entirely by January 2009. And all while this was happening, there was a small Seattle-based offshoot of the Flagship company, led by Travis Baldry, that was working on a lighter secondary MMO project called Mythos. In August 2008, almost immediately after Flagship's closure, Travis Baldry, Max and Eric Schaefer, and Peter Hugh formed Runic Games. Their mission was simple: keep the talented Mythos team alive and build a spiritual successor to the action RPG games they were famous for making. Runic Games started with very little money, with no publisher backing them initially, and no time to waste. They simply could not afford to build a massive MMO with cutting-edge graphics. Instead of trying to secure a massive budget to build a complex custom engine or force MMO server networking into their new game, they aggressively cut their scope. They decided to build a pure single-player action RPG set in a single town with one massive descending dungeon. What they built was Torchlight. Released within 14 months of launching their new studio, Runic Games, in October 2009. To save money and development time, they went for a bright, stylized, cartoony action direction. This meant they didn't have to waste resources on expensive, hyper-realistic graphics, and it had the added bonus of allowing the game to run smoothly on almost any low-end PC or laptop. And the result? Torchlight was a massive, critical, and commercial success. It sold over 1 million copies, saved the studio, and proved that a focused, highly polished game built by a small team will consistently outshine a bloated, mismanaged project with an unlimited budget. The success of Torchlight in 2009 wasn't a fluke either. It was a masterclass in genre refinement. When the game launched, it proved a definitive point. Max and Eric Schaefer, alongside Travis Baldry, who is the creator of Faith, understood the action RPG loop. Then, 3 years later, was a battle of David versus Goliath. It was a battle over the very soul of the genre, fought between a massive studio and the genre's original architects, Diablo III versus Torchlight II. When Blizzard Entertainment launched Diablo III, the anticipation was historic. Over 2 million people had pre-ordered the game, and thousands of midnight launch events were held globally. But instead of a triumphant launch, players were met with a masterclass in how not to launch a highly anticipated game. Blizzard made the controversial decision to require a persistent internet connection for Diablo III, even for players who only wanted to play the single-player campaign. Then, the infrastructure immediately collapsed. As millions of people tried to log in simultaneously, the servers just stopped working. Players were met with a simple prompt: "The servers are busy at this time. Please try again later." And because the game lacked an offline mode, the single-player campaign was completely inaccessible. It took days for server stability to normalize, leaving a deeply soured first impression. And on top of that, Blizzard introduced an in-game auction house where players could buy and sell loot for real-world cash, with Blizzard taking a cut of every transaction. While Blizzard claimed this auction house was implemented for security and to eliminate third-party gold sellers rather than for profit, its existence fundamentally broke the game's design and what made action RPGs actually good. 4 months later, Runic Games released Torchlight II. While it lacked Blizzard's massive budget and hyper-realistic cinematics, it offered exactly what alienated Diablo fans were starving for. There was no internet requirement, and the game launched at $20, a third of Diablo III's $60 asking price. And unlike Diablo III, which simplified skill trees into swappable loadouts, Torchlight II kept permanent skill points allocation and a robust character building, whilst also making the game moddable, which allowed players to create custom classes, items, and dungeons. For a brief moment, in late 2012, the original creators successfully challenged their own creation. Torchlight II was widely viewed by the hardcore action RPG community as a true spiritual successor of Diablo II. While Diablo III was a commercial juggernaut that sold tens of millions of copies, Torchlight II won the ideological battle of 2012. But ideology doesn't pay bills. Just like Blizzard North, money is key, and a lack of it will lead to an end. The beginning of the End of Runic wasn't a sudden collapse, but a gradual dilution of the founding vision as the studio grew and publisher mandates shifted. In 2014, co-founders Travis Baldry and Eric Schiffer left Runic Games to form Double Damage Games. They specifically had a desire to escape the studio bloat and return to smaller scale development, where they had more control. This led to the original creative core being fractured. Then, Max Schiffer departed in 2016 to form a new studio, and by late 2017, the parent company, Perfect World Entertainment, permanently closed Runic Games. The publisher's stated reason was to shift their focus towards games as a service. This era of self-contained premium action RPG was over. In 2018, Max Schiffer's new studio, Ectra Games, attempted to revive the IP by announcing Torchlight Frontiers. It was revealed as a free-to-play shared world MMO Lite. Alpha testers revolted, realizing the mechanics required to sustain a free-to-play MMO fundamentally broke the satisfying loot and progression loops that defined the original games. In a panic, Ectra rebrands the game to Torchlight 3, stripping out the free-to-play monetization and pivoting it back to a premium release. But unfortunately, you can't easily slap a price tag on a game built from the ground up to be a live service grinder. It launched to mediocre reviews of feeling shallow, linear, and structurally compromised. Ectra Games was eventually acquired by Zynga, and the Torchlight IP was passed off to a mobile developer to create Torchlight Infinite, a live service gacha game. We don't talk about it here. The life cycle of Torchlight perfectly illustrates that the magic of those early games wasn't just the art style or the engine. It was the specific combination of a small group of visionary creators making exactly the game they wanted to play. With the inevitable change and publishers demanding live service game that ends up stripping creators' creativity away, the franchise became just another IP wearing the skin of a beloved classic. And despite all of that, the genre is currently in a golden age. Even though we have games like Diablo IV that are the epitome of live service, we also have games like Grim Dawn that keeps the old school purist feel that is similar to the classic late 90s, early 2000s action RPG era that these guys defined. And well, that's the story of the guys who shaped a genre. What action RPG is your favorite? Let me know down in the comments, and please be sure to like and subscribe. See you in the next one.